Hi, welcome to the Baseball Nation show here on SB Nation's YouTube channel. I'm Rob Neyer.
I'm Grant Brisbee.
And Grant and I will be here every week. This is our very first episode, but we'll be reviewing the happenings around the baseball world. This week's show is devoted to the trade deadline. We're recording this on Tuesday, just a few hours after the deadline. And let's launch right into it. Grant, I wanted to talk today about, first of all, about the difference that we've seen between the National League West and the American League East, two of the sort of power divisions. And I was struck by just how little activity there was in the AL East compared to the National League West, which is, of course, your Giants playing the NL West.
Yeah, it caught me by surprise too. I mean, I kind of figured the Yankees would do little. I didn't think they would do Casey McGehee. I didn't think that it would, just kind of stop at Casey McGehee. But yeah, the Giants and the Dodgers kind of had a little arms race going on, picking over the bones of the Phillies. It was fun to watch for a while, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, and the Yankees came up at the sort of at the last minute as possibly suitors for Ryan Dempster. Of course, that did not happen. They didn't get him. They got McGee, as you said. Really sort of a nothing deal. I mean, he probably won't even be on their postseason roster. So essentially, they did nothing. The Red Sox went out and got a relief pitcher who's probably not going to be the difference between winning and losing. The Orioles did something. I'm looking at my notes here. Or maybe I guess they didn't do anything. There was a lot of talk about them picking up Joe Blanton, but that didn't happen. So basically, the big contenders, and the Rays also didn't do anything. So they picked up Ryan Roberts last week, but at the deadline, none of the four AL East contenders did anything of real importance. While in the NL West, of course, the Dodgers were very active, Giants were very active. One thing that surprised me a little bit was that the Diamondbacks didn't do anything to keep up with the Dodgers and the Giants. There was a lot of talk about them going out and getting a starting pitcher, which they did before this season when they went out and got Trevor Cahill. But the Diamondbacks entered the day only 3.5 games out of first place and seemed to me like real contenders. And I was surprised they didn't make a big move.
Yeah, I thought the Diamondbacks were clear favorites coming into the season. I didn't think that they were neck and neck with the Giants. I thought they had a leg up. But with Daniel Hudson going out for the year and Ian Kennedy not doing so well, I think they kind of needed another pitcher. I mean, they're talking about Matt Garza. They were talking about maybe even like Cliff Lee. I saw some crazy rumors. But they could have used another starting pitcher. But they're in pretty good shape. I think 3.5 back with that team. If Justin Upton can start hitting a little bit, I think they're a pretty good team. But I'm a little surprised they didn't do just slightly more.
Yeah, and they have a number of infielders, probably more than they can use. And there was a lot of talk about, again, trading for a starting pitcher. On the other hand, I think if I were a Diamondbacks fan, I wouldn't be displeased because when they traded for a starting pitcher last winter, they traded Jared Parker to the A's and got Trevor Cahill back. There were other players involved, but those were the two biggest talents probably. And as it turns out, Parker's actually been better this season for the A's than Cahill has been for the Diamondbacks. Maybe they were better off keeping their young pitchers. Patrick Corbin, for being a great example, who hasn't pitched all that well for them in the majors, but has been real good in the minors. He might be better than whoever they would have gotten, especially in the long run. So I'm not saying they did anything wrong, the Diamondbacks, but I'm just a little surprised they weren't more aggressive. A similar team in terms of their position is the A's, who were, unlike the Diamondbacks, were not expected to be competitive this season. And yet they are. They're not that far behind the Rangers. They're basically tied with the Angels in the AL West. But the A's did nothing at the deadline. And I suppose there's some thought that they shouldn't do anything because their chemistry is so great and things have been going so well. They had their 12th walk-off win Monday night. And clearly they are contenders at this point. They're actually in the lead in the wild card standings. But they could probably use some offense, and they didn't do anything. Maybe that's just a condition of where they are financially.
Yeah, they were in on everyone. I mean, I'm not sure how legit that was, but they were supposedly in on Stephen Drew till the very end. I know they wanted to reacquire Marco Scudero before the Giants got him, so they were looking for help at shortstop, maybe even help at third. But I don't think there was a whole lot available. I don't think they were missing out on too much, and I don't think they were ever going to pay for prospects or salary for someone like Josh Willingham, to reacquire him. So I don't think there was a whole lot they could have done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were certainly, we saw some third basemen change hands. Chris Johnson, Ryan Roberts, Stephen Drew was maybe available. Hard to say now. Maybe they felt like that whatever they would have gained in hitting, they would have lost in defense, or probably they just didn't want to trade any prospects because they don't really have that many prospects, especially when it comes to hitting prospects. If they had any, they'd be in the majors right now. So I think they're just going to play it out and hope for the best. I wouldn't say they're a favorite in my mind for one of the wild card spots, even though they are in the lead. I think they are. The hitting is probably going to be in their undoing at some point. But they weren't active, just like the Dodgers and the Giants were active. The Rangers and the Angels were quite active, picking up some premier starting pitchers, which you might want to talk about now.
I think the Angels. I like what the Angels did with Greinke. They didn't give up, a huge top, 50 prospect. I think Baseball America had Segura as the top 100 prospect. But, for a rental, it's a steep price, but I think they're going to try and re-sign him. I think they're going to assume that they're going to enjoy a nice exclusive negotiating window with Zach Greinke, and that helps. And then it obviously helps for this year. It helps if they get into the postseason. I mean, that's a pretty dynamite front of the rotation that they built there with Jared Weaver, C.J. Wilson, and now Greinke. And that's assuming that Dan Herron's kind of broken now, and he can always turn it around. He's always been a fluky first half pitcher. If he can turn around to be that fluky second half pitcher, he'd be something else. So I really like that trade, but I also like what the Rangers did with Dempster. I don't think they gave up too much for Dempster. And after Colby Lewis got hurt and Oswalt get moved to the bullpen, I think that's a fantastic move, swooping into the last second after all the dust settled, because I think the Braves offered more. It was sort of a fluke that Dempster even got to the Rangers.
Yeah, and I think that both of those teams now have, I wouldn't say have locked anything down, but they both look like incredible bets now to go to the postseason. Rangers probably win the division. Angels probably win the wild card, but their talent now seems overwhelming, and it looked pretty good coming into the season. They look like playoff teams, and now they just look more like playoff teams. Of course, they both had to deal with injuries, and they basically reloaded. You mentioned that they didn't have to give up a lot to get those guys, and I think one thing I noticed this year at the trading deadline is that there wasn't. I can't think of a single truly premier prospect who got traded. Last year, the Giants gave up Zach Wheeler to get Carlos Beltran from the Mets. I think he was the best prospect that changed hands a year ago. I mean, who was the best prospect that got traded this year?
Probably Jacob Turner, with the Tigers getting Anibal Sanchez and Omar Infante. Either Turner or Segura, but I think it's Turner.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the Tigers got two guys when they traded Turner.
Right. And one of them's going to be around for next year.
Right.
Infante. So, I mean, it's kind of weird because that was the trade that happened before the deadline. So you figure, maybe there's not that sense of urgency or panic that they might have gotten away without trading Turner. But I think he's the best prospect. He's a pretty good prospect. I mean, the Marlins did do pretty well for themselves when it came to the prospects. But you're right. I mean, there wasn't that Zach Wheeler. There wasn't, Jurickson Profar. I'm going to screw up that name. That's the thing about saying these things out loud. I've only written Profar's name. I mean, it could be like Poifar or something funny. But as far as I know, it's Jurickson Profar, right?
I hope so. That's what I've been saying.
I don't know. Anyways, but I mean, none of those guys change hands. I mean, not that they always do, but you figure there's going to be, that one kind of Boffo trade, like when Miguel Cabrera got traded in the offseason from the Marlins, and you had, Cameron Maybin switching hands, Andrew Miller. I mean, you had huge prospects going back and forth. You certainly didn't see any of that this time.
Well, speaking of the Tigers, let's move to the AL Central. Has the balance of power changed at all with the deadline deals in the Central?
Yeah, except that I still kind of like the White Sox. I like what they did. I mean, at the deadline, for a team that didn't have a system, to get Kevin Youkilis and Brett Myers for really not a whole heck of a lot. I thought that was very astute. I mean, they've got their problems. They've got Chris Sale with a dead arm. They've got all sorts of little things here and there. I mean, their middle infield is hitting a combined nothing. Um, but I still like the White Sox. I think the Tigers are clearly the best team. We knew that going into the year. They're probably the best team. They are the favorites. Now they've got Sanchez and Infante. They're even better. But I still like the White Sox to do something. The Indians not so much because of the starting pitching. But I could still see the White Sox sneaking in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I actually like the White Sox to win the division as recently as 2 weeks ago. But now that the Tigers have closed the gap, in fact, they went ahead for a day or two. Now they're a couple of games behind, but they got a lot better at two spots. They got a lot better at starting pitcher with Anibal Sanchez, and they upgraded in a big way at second base, where they've had basically nothing all season. And all the White Sox did really of substance, in my opinion, is Francisco Liriano. And it's hard to say for sure what they're going to get out of him. I mean, he's been pretty good since the middle of May. He was awful in April and early May, but since he's been real good since then. I just don't know if we can really count on him to continue pitching well for 2 more months. So I think the Tigers probably do now play like we thought they were going to play. I don't think they're going to run away with it, but they probably do win 90+ games, do win the division. But I would agree with you, the White Sox have a real shot at a playoff spot, if not the division.
The one thing that scares me is the Chris Sale dead arm thing. I mean, he's converting from a reliever. He's probably never really had the workload that he would have had if they made it into the playoffs. But his dead arm scares me. I actually turned on the game with him and Yu Darvish, that matchup, and I went into it all excited, and Sale looked terrible. He looked like a pitcher with a dead arm. So if skipping a start in the rotation doesn't fix that, I mean, they're not in good shape, because he's a huge part of their success this year.
Yeah, that's right. They really need him. They need him to pitch well. So let's go to the NL Central. Basically, three contenders: the Reds, first place; Pirates, second place; Cardinals, third place, although with an excellent run differential. And none of those teams, well, I shouldn't say none of them, two of those teams weren't particularly active over the last week. I think the Pirates, clearly in my mind, might be the big winners in trade deadline derby, at least relative to their competition. What do you think?
I love the moves that they made. I mean, I really do. I love the Wandy Rodriguez made. I've been pushing for someone to trade for Wandy Rodriguez for a while. I really like him. I don't know why. It's just like a fascination. He's been under the radar for so long. But that's the kind of move where they gave up. I mean, the Pirates gave up some value. I mean, they didn't just pick him up for a 26-year-old AAA guy. I mean, they gave up Colton Kane. I mean, they gave up some guys who were in their top 15 prospects list. But Rodriguez helps them this year, and then he helps them. He helps them resist the urge to sign a Brett Tomko in the offseason. Not like the actual Brett Tomko, but like the Brett Tomko spirit animal. Just whatever today's Brett Tomko is. They're not going to have to do that in the offseason. They're going to have Wandy Rodriguez, who's a pretty good pitcher, in the fold for next year. And that's kind of what they needed, because they're contending a little bit ahead of schedule. So they didn't want to go nuts and just say, okay, this is the year the window's closing. So when you're ahead of schedule, you want to do something that's for now, but also a little bit, at least for next season. I think Wandy helps that. And then Travis Snyder was great. I mean, they needed an outfielder. They preferred an outfielder, and they got a pretty good upside candidate with Snyder, and they gave up a good piece of their current bullpen, but nothing that they couldn't withstand. I mean, they had depth in the bullpen, so I love the Pirates' moves.
Well, and what I like about the moves, leaving aside Wandy Rodriguez, which is clearly that's an easy one. That's a big win for them. They went out and got Gabby Sanchez, who was so bad in the first half that the Marlins sent him down to the minors and traded for Carlos Lee. Sanchez is not a great player. He's not even particularly good, but he's probably better than what the Pirates have had at first base this year, which is a lot of Casey McGee, basically. They also went out and got Snyder, as you mentioned. Snyder is probably better than the guys they've had in right field this year, or at least one of the corner outfield spots. So neither one of those guys are great, but they're incremental upgrades. And you make enough incremental upgrades and you pick up 2 or 3 games, and that might make a difference.
Yeah, I think the Pirates surprised us a lot because we're looking at that roster in the offseason. It had some talent, but now you know a couple of things. You know that Burnett is not going to be a total waste. He's actually going to have some value. You know that Andrew McCutchen is going to, at age 25, go nuts. Little things like that. Pedro Alvarez, he's not going to be your perfect number 4 hitter right away, but he's at least not going to be the complete zero that he was last year. So now you're looking at the Pirates with a little bit different eye. You're starting to see these little incremental upgrades that you're already taking for granted that you weren't looking at in the offseason. And now you're adding on guys like Rodriguez and Snyder. And it's easy to look at them as legit contenders.
Right, I think so. I'm still not totally sold on them as division winners, but they look like they're in really good shape, at least 50-50 for a playoff spot, probably via the wild card. Let's shift to the NL East. We're basically down to 2 contenders in the NL East. The Phillies have given up. They were sellers. They didn't trade Joe Blanton, at least not yet. I think they could make more moves. They did trade Victorino. They did trade Pence. They're clearly not playing for this season anymore. Mets didn't do anything, which is smart because they're not really contenders anymore after the recent slump. So that leaves basically 2 teams, the Braves and the Nationals. And the Nationals did not do anything. Do you think they should have done something to hold off the Braves?
No, I mean, they've got a pretty complete team now that they're going to get Worth back, and Morris is back. LaRoche is hitting. I mean, I didn't see a clear upgrade. Even Bernardina is hitting in center field. That was in the offseason. That's hammering that point. They need to trade for Marlon Byrd. They need to trade for Peter Bourjos. And obviously, those guys have been terrible this year, and Bernardina's been pretty good. So if they were to do anything, it would have been something like a Victorino, I think, would have helped. But they're as complete a team as you're going to see in the National League. So I think it's smart of them not to panic.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I do think they're complete. I think the Braves have a shot at catching them, especially if they wind up sitting Steven Strasburg. But we still don't have any idea what's going to happen there, so it's really hard to say what they'll look like in September, whether they'll have their best pitcher or not. Before we finish up on this, I wanted to mention. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, isn't it funny that after all the months and months of where's Oswalt going to sign, where's Oswalt going to sign, that it's Ben Sheets that's the kind of rotation guy in the glass case who helps the Braves out of nowhere. It amuses me for some reason.
Well, yeah, that not only that, but also Oswalt's been terrible.
Right, and Sheets has been great.
Yeah, I mean that certainly came out of nowhere. No, that was. We'll see if it lasts, but if Sheets is good, and of course now they've added Paul Maholm in a trade with the Cubs, that's a pretty impressive starting rotation the Braves have.
Yeah, I mean they were 8 deep to start the year. They're not exactly 8 deep now. I mean that's been a weird turnover. They had so much depth, and man, that was like Spinal Tap drummers for a while. I mean, just the guys going down to Tommy John, or just pure suckitude. I mean, we're talking Mike Minor, just things you weren't expecting. You were kind of penciling the Braves to having all this depth, and it really turned out quite differently. But they, as far as adjusting on the fly to get Ben Sheets and Paul Maholm, I mean, they've done pretty well for themselves.
Yeah, and it does go to prove that old maxim, you can never have too much starting pitching, actually is true, at least a lot of the time. I wanted to mention my favorite under the radar move, and I'll give you a second to think of yours. But one thing that happened today that was a very minor move, it might have been the smallest trade of the day. In fact, I'm sure that it was, at least from what we've heard, was the Red Sox trading their failed first base prospect, Lars Anderson, who was one of the best hitting prospects in baseball 3 years ago, but has washed out basically. They traded Lars Anderson to the Indians for a 27-year-old pitcher named Stephen Wright. And Wright is an interesting guy. He throws 90. He's also a knuckleball pitcher. He started throwing knuckleball last year, and it's almost as if we got the next R.A. Dickey in training with the Red Sox. Granted, the odds are against him being that guy, but Dickey sort of could inspire guys who actually throw hard to throw knuckleballs, which we haven't had before. It's always been guys who couldn't throw hard at all, or guys who used to be able to throw hard and couldn't anymore. But Dickey throws in the mid-'80s and decided to throw knuckleballs. And it looks like this guy, Stephen Wright, is trying to do the same thing. And it'll be interesting to see. I've not read anything about how hard he throws the knuckleball. I don't know if he throws them 80 plus like Dickey does, but I think that's the new paradigm for knuckleball pitchers, is guys who actually have arm strength and translate that into throwing hard knuckleballs. What about you? You got a favorite under the radar move?
Yeah, I might be biased, but I like Marco Scutaro for the Giants. They didn't give up anyone that I'm particularly going to miss as a Giants prospect hound. And I think that Hunter Pence is going to get all the press, and he upgrades the lineup. But I think if you look at the difference between what the Giants had with Schierholtz, Pagan, and Blanco all getting at bats, the difference between that and Pence, and then the difference between the at-bats that Scutaro is going to steal, whether it's from Brandon Crawford or Ryan Theriot, I think Scutaro is just as important of an upgrade offensively. I think that's a really, really good move that didn't cost a lot and helped the Giants where they really needed it most. They didn't need an outfielder quite as much as they needed a shortstop, second baseman, and they got Scutaro, basically for nothing.
Grant, I agree completely. I thought the Scutaro deal was excellent. Under the radar, but a really nice move for the Giants. That'll do it for this week. We will be back next week. We'll also be answering your email. If you have any questions, please send them to baseballshow@sbnation.com. Grant and I would love to answer them. And until next week, I'm Rob Neyer.
I'm Grant Brisbee, and we will see you next week.